let's try one. And you're looking into this camera.
Between 1801 and 1901, Manchester's population increased from 330,000 to 2.4 million. It was Cottonopolis. It was the city at the heart of the Industrial Revolution. That fact is itself the result of a certain amount of happenstance. Certainly, the waterways of Manchester helped, as did its long tradition of weaving. But in a sense, it was fortuitous that Manchester was the spot where the two great streams of the Industrial Revolution came together. The larger.
That was wonderful.
That was great.
The light came out, which is why we had to. Yes, every time the sun comes in and out, we're gonna have to.
Go shoot. Go ahead.
Not yet.
Second, it's a violent exposure. You can extreme adjustment.
Okay. Let's try.
The larger and later stream started in Glasgow, where James Watt sat at the knees of scientists and developed his idea for a separate condenser steam engine, one that would radically increase the efficiency of this power-producing marvel over the earlier Newcomen engines. Watt couldn't actually produce an effective steam engine in Glasgow. He didn't have good enough metal parts. It was only when, again, almost by happenstance, he moved down to Birmingham and partnered with Matthew Boulton, who brought his own political skills, financing, remarkable organizational talents to the problem, that the Boulton and Watt steam engine could be made. And of course, none of that could have happened without the metalworking traditions of Birmingham, which enabled this engine to be efficient and safe and, let me start again, hold on. None of that could have happened without the metalworking traditions of Birmingham, which enabled the quality of the engine to be strong enough. The earlier stream of the Industrial Revolution involved the production of garments, the production of fabric. And it was that revolution that caused the transformation from the highly expensive garments of the Renaissance to the cheap, but typically higher quality garments that we actually get in stores like Walmart and Costco today. That happened because of a stream of innovations, often with quaint names like the flying shuttle or the spinning jenny or the spinning frame, that enabled the mass production of fabric. The person who brought together those two streams here in Manchester
How's the light looking? Are we going to get sun again in a second?
probably.
I can't tell to the closer.
Because if we are, just give it a sec.
I think it might be a bird.
I can't see it. I got a tree right here.
Moving, no, it's moving to the left. I think we're going to pause for a minute.
So we're going to pause? Okay, so hold on. Let me readjust. Sorry,
Well,
Ed.
it's different than filming in the studio.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
it is more fun.
Okay, go ahead.
Richard Arkwright was the industrialist and pioneer who brought together those two streams here in Manchester. His mill in Shoot Hill was the first urban mill that we know of that actually was intended to be powered not by water power, which had powered his earlier Cromford mill, but actually by a steam engine. Apparently, he tried to use a Newcomen engine, which didn't work all that well, so they ended up relying on water, but still it was here in Manchester where it came together. Arkwright himself is a sort of amazing figure who is responsible for the spinning frame, right? This attempt to actually create cotton threads that were strong enough to be the warp, not just the weft of woven fabric. This idea is not just Arkwright's idea. He had employed John Kay, who, at least according to the subsequent litigation, had stolen the idea from Thomas Hayes, Thomas Hayes, and Hayes had. Richard Arkwright himself was part of one of those chains of creativity where one smart person borrowed the ideas of his or her predecessors. Arkwright employed John Kay. Arkwright himself was a wig maker. Kay had perhaps stolen the ideas from Thomas Hayes. At least that's the allegation in subsequent litigation. Hayes himself worked on the idea of Louis Paul, who is usually credited with the idea of spinning rollers, roller spinning, sorry. Hayes himself had borrowed the ideas from Louis Paul, who is typically credited as being the parent of roller spinning. A chain of brilliance, each person advancing the ideas, often without giving his or her predecessors credit. This is often how our creative species works. But it's Arkwright who pulls the ideas together and has the organizational capacity to make this work in Cromford Mill and to bring it here to Manchester, where he would set off a wave of industrialization that would make this Cottonopolis. One of the remarkable things about this city, as opposed to American industrial towns like Detroit or Pittsburgh, is that it was never dominated by a single producer. Arkwright was never able to enforce his monopoly. Instead, there were mills throughout the town, separate producers, separate companies, each competing, each innovating, each turning this into the cotton-producing capital of the world. Now, of course, all of that was not entirely benign. Cottonopolis was filthy. These mills, with their steam engines that were coal-powered, belched out smoke. The waterways became terribly polluted as well. The working conditions in industrial Manchester were seen often as horrific. Indeed, this was where Friedrich Engels wrote his Condition of the Working Class in England. But it would be foolish to be nostalgic about our pre-industrial past. That past is one of poverty, of starvation, of infant mortality levels. The Industrial Revolution is the watershed that separates our wealthy present from this painful past. And indeed, Manchester remains the city where it all happened. The marvel of the industrial world, the cotton capital of humanity.
That was great.
You want to let him cut him across? Come on, go across. Go across.
Go ahead. No, he's one to go on. Thank you. You don't have to wait. Thank you.
The wind's actually all right.
No, but thank you. It's very kind of you nonetheless.
You could walk. I couldn't shout.
Thank you.
The mic is holding up pretty well.
You want me to, shall we shoot again a little bit more just in case? I'll just keep on going. We'll see whatever.
Just a little more, just a little, I mean, you don't have to move it, just the wires stick out just a little bit.
Yeah, that was great. But let's do it again.
Yep.
I'm glad you mentioned the chains of influence. I feel like this parallels so nicely when you're talking about finance.
That's right. Exactly.
So just stay behind the clouds, it's perfect.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah, this is where the flexibility also is really good stuff.
Stickiness.
I think that would be our problem in Manchester.
It's true. Okay. Okay, Chief.
We're rolling.
Okay. Between 1801 and 1901, Manchester's population increased from 330,000 to 2.4 million. It was the city at the heart of the industrialization. Between 1801 and 1901, Manchester's population grew from 330,000 to 2.4 million. It was the city at the heart of the Industrial Revolution. It was the United Kingdom's and the world's Cottonopolis, a great textile-producing city that it was the United Kingdom's and the world's Cottonopolis, a great textile-producing city that employed hundreds of thousands of workers in mills that belched out smoke and that made cheap cloth for the entire planet. In a sense, Manchester was the city where the two great streams of the Industrial Revolution came together. The later and larger stream involved steam power. It involved the separate condenser engines produced by Boulton and Watt. They start when Watt sits at the foot of scientists at the University of Glasgow, and he figures out the basic mechanics of the separate condenser steam engine, which greatly improved on the efficiency of the Newcomen engine. Watt actually can't produce efficient engines in Glasgow. Watt can't actually produce efficient engines in Glasgow. He doesn't have the metalworking expertise. So almost by chance, he ended up moving down to Birmingham and partnering with Matthew Boulton. Boulton brought his political skills, his financing, his organizational talents to the problem, and there in Birmingham they could also draw on the historic metalworking expertise of the city, metalworking talents which enabled them to produce steam engines that worked. The other stream, the earlier one, the more incremental stream, involved a series of inventions in the creation of cloth. These often have quaint names like the flying shuttle, the spinning jenny, the spinning frame. And all of them were involved in making cloth stronger and cheaper and using machines to mass produce a product that had once been had once been created by individual households, often throughout India. Here in Manchester, Arkwright put together the spinning frame and the engine here in his Shoot Hill mill. But Arkwright's spinning frame wasn't the invention of his solitary genius. It was once again part of one of these chains of creativity. Perhaps it starts with Louis Paul, who is often given credit for roller spinning. Louis Paul's attempts to make this work fail, although he does briefly have a patent on it. Louis Paul's attempts to commercialize this actually fail, but the idea is in the air. It then gets picked up by Thomas Hayes, and, sorry, Louis Paul's, okay, no, the sun is coming on, I don't want to have to do it. Louis Paul's, Louis Paul's ideas then get picked up by Thomas Hayes. From Hayes, they travel to John Kay, and John Kay is employed by Richard Arkwright. There's a later lawsuit about the patent on the. There's a later lawsuit on the patent on the spinning frame, and indeed, there's lots of allegations of intellectual theft.
Start with the patent line.
Okay, I'm actually going to start with. Louis Paul is often credited as being the first mover in coming up with the idea of roller spinning, but he fails to be able to commercialize on the idea. It then gets passed along to Thomas Hayes, and then perhaps stolen by John Kay, who's later employed by Richard Arkwright. There's, of course, a lively lawsuit at the end of the day about who's actually responsible for these ideas, and it seems that at least it's possible that a fair amount of intellectual theft is involved in this collaborative chain of creativity. And at least it's possible that there's a fair amount of theft in this collaborative chain of creativity. But Arkwright manages to produce the spinning frame, a big improvement in the strength of the yarn that's created over the earlier spinning jennies, and so much so that Arkwright's threads can be used as the warp, not just the weft of fabric. He puts this frame into Cromford Mill, which is powered by water, and then ultimately here into Manchester in the first attempt to have an engine that's powered by steam that's actually making this mill go. Now it turns out that Arkwright uses a Newcomen engine rather than a Boulton and Watt model, and it doesn't work. He needs to replace it by water power, but it points the way forward, because ultimately to urbanize, industrial mills needed to be powered by more than just water power. You actually needed engines which could be brought into the city. Now, of course, the downside of all those engines is they belched out enormous amounts of smoke, and Manchester became enormously polluted during the course of the 19th century. Its waterways also became places of filth, and no one would ever want to romanticize the working conditions of industrial Manchester. There's a reason why this was a hotbed of political reform during the 19th century. There's a reason why Friedrich Engels wrote his Condition of the Working Class in England here in Manchester. But of course, it's also foolish to nostalgize the pre-industrial past. Before the Industrial Revolution, humanity was vastly poorer, vastly sicker, vastly more likely to die in childbirth. The Industrial Revolution marks the dividing point between that past of almost eternal poverty to the present, to our era of much greater prosperity. And if there's one center of that remarkable event which moved mankind on that, moved mankind towards a life of greater prosperity. The centerpiece of that change was right here in Manchester, the heart of the Industrial Revolution.
That was awesome. Maybe just that last.
Okay. Sure. Sure. Steam engines enabled factories, enabled mills to be brought into city centers because they no longer needed to rely on the rolling water power that had powered force. Steam engines enabled those mills to come into city centers because they no longer required the water power on rivers that existed outside of cities. They came in, but of course they brought with them the smoke. Think about all these mills belching out all this polluting air during the Industrial Revolution. And of course they polluted the waterways as well. It would be foolish also to romanticize the working conditions in these mills. There's a reason why Friedrich Engels was right here in Manchester when he wrote the conditions of the working class in England. There's a reason why so many liberal reform movements started here in Manchester. But at the same time, it would be foolish to nostalgize the pre-industrial past. The Industrial Revolution is the watershed that marks the division between an almost eternal past of human misery and poverty and our present age of prosperity and wealth. The pre-industrial past was an era of infant mortality, of disease, of starvation. Our post-industrial world, for all of its problems, is not. And we should never forget that at the heart of the Industrial Revolution, there was this city. There was Manchester, right? The place of urban creativity, of enormous competition, of enormous innovation.
How was it with the sun and the helicopter?
Well, I
You
mean,
were, you were great. It's the outside world that
Yeah.
conspires against
I
you.
thought it was good. I mean, we had a little bit of that, but that's also our second paper. Hey,
I wouldn't mind doing the ending
check it, bud.
just one more time after this gentleman passed.
Check it, bro. You're from BBC News, you. Where you from? From Massachusetts.
Oh, what are you filming, man?
Just a professor from Harvard.
Oh, you're the professor from Harvard University?
Yeah,
Nice to meet you, Professor from Harvard
nice to meet you.
University. My name's Tempo from Crew.
Excellent.
Yeah, man.
All right.
I would love to do the ending just one more time if the world doesn't
Sure.
conspire against
Well, I'm going to take it from the second stream.
Are
Okay,
we about?
adjust for sun. It's a lot of sun coming up the next, I don't know,
So we have a lot of sun coming up?
1 minute.
Okay, so hold on.
the helicopter.
Right, said Fred. Both of us together. One and two.
Is that actually the band Right Said Fred, or is that all
The band named Right Said Fred is named after the song Right Said Fred by Bernard Cribbins from 1961. Yes.
Oh, I had no idea.
We could play it on YouTube later.
So it's nothing to do with Relax, Don't Do It?
That's right. Yeah. Okay.
Hold on.
How does the helicopter sound? Is it faded?
I think we're okay now.
Just wait till 7 minutes.
Okay, go ahead.
Arkwright built on a chain of collaborative creativity that starts perhaps when Louis Paul, a Huguenot exile, comes up with the idea of roller spinning decades earlier. Paul is not able to commercialize his idea. No?
That helicopter's hovering right now. Just give it 2 seconds.
We're okay for time.
Is the sun going back under?
Not for a bit.
It's going to be out like this?
For a bit,
Okay,
yeah.
as long as it stays consistent, I don't care.
I mean, there's patches of cloud, but for the most part. Sorry, there's patches.
Oh, this is good.
Okay, go ahead.
Yep, do it.
Helicopter okay?
Okay. Arkwright built on a chain of ideas that starts perhaps when Louis Paul, a Huguenot exile, comes up with the idea of roller spinning. Paul is unable to commercialize on his idea, but it remains in the air and gets taken up by Thomas Hayes. Hayes' knowledge is then borrowed or perhaps stolen by John Kay, who's then employed by Arkwright, himself a wig maker. All of these debates about intellectual property are hashed out in a great lawsuit that follows upon Arkwright's patent. Arkwright then takes the idea of the spinning frame, which can produce vastly stronger threads than the earlier spinning jenny, threads that can act as the warp, not just the weft, of fabric. Arkwright then builds the Cromford mill, which is powered by water and hence outside a city centre, and then brings a mill right here into Manchester, the Shoot Hill mill, that actually is supposed to be powered by a Newcomen engine. The Newcomen engine isn't really up to the task, and consequently they end up using water power anyway. But it paves the way towards an urban future in which mills are powered by steam engines rather than by waterways. All those steam engines, of course, belch forth smoke, and Manchester becomes a city that is known for its poor air quality, known for its gray shadows that are cast throughout its industrial might. The water is also polluted. Yep.
It's just too much of the sun going in and out, in and out. We won't be able to cut around it. It's too much going in and out on this one particular tape.
Okay.
Do you see any consistency coming up at all?
There's a lot of sun right now, but there'll be clouds in 45 seconds. There's a lot of sun now.
Yeah, not a problem making this one there.
And can you move just a little to your right so that pole is your right there, yeah.
This one.
That pole's your mark, yeah.
Okay.
Hang on
Don't worry, don't worry.
A little bit to your left, sorry. Just a little bit to your left.
Where should I take it? Where should I take it from?
I mean, that was tough. That was a lot of...
All right, let me just take it from where I went. Richard Arkwright built on a chain of collaborative creativity that perhaps starts when Louis Paul, a Huguenot exile, comes up with the idea of roller spinning. Paul is unable to commercialize on the idea, but it passes into the air. It's taken up by Thomas Hayes, and perhaps his knowledge is borrowed or stolen even by John Kay, who's employed by Arkwright, a wig maker. All of these disputes over intellectual property are covered in a giant lawsuit that follows. Arkwright is able to take the idea of roller spinning, turn it into the spinning frame, and then build the Cromford Mill, one of the great industrial successes of its time period. But of course, Cromford is powered by water and hence is outside a city center. Arkwright also comes up with the idea then of bringing the mills inside, pointing the way to the future using steam power instead of water to make the mill work. And that's why he builds his Shoot Hill Mill here in Manchester. Now, Shoot Hill tries to use a Newcomen engine rather than a later Bolton and Watt model, and hence doesn't really work, and he has to use water power anyway, but still it points the way towards the future. It points the way towards a future in which steam power allows mills to come into city centers. Now, of course, as they come in, they also belch forth smoke, and Manchester becomes a city of grayness, a city of air pollution, a city of water pollution, and a city that is known for often horrific working conditions for the industrial working classes. Indeed, it is here in which Friedrich Engels writes his Condition of the Working Class in England. But just as it would be future to romanticize conditions in industrial Manchester, it would also be foolish to romanticize the pre-industrial past. That past is basically that past is one in which humankind lived for millennia, perpetually on the edge of starvation, fighting constantly with infant mortality, fighting constantly with internecine conflict. And it's the Industrial Revolution that is the watershed that marks our prosperous present from that past. And consequently, we should never forget that it was the urban ideas, the urban coordination, the competition in Manchester that enabled that Industrial Revolution to occur. One more paragraph I want to take. Okay. Whereas many American industrial cities, like Detroit or Pittsburgh, became known as being one-company towns, or perhaps three-company towns, that was never Manchester's way. Arkwright was never able to enforce a monopoly on his ideas, and consequently 1,000 flowers bloomed. This city was filled with different mills, competing with one another, fighting for market share, fighting to produce better and better cloth. And that's part of what made this city so dynamic during the 19th century.
That added part, you might want to try one more time if you don't mind.
Just the competition part again?
Yeah.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Whereas many American industrial cities like Detroit or Pittsburgh often became one or three company towns, that was never Manchester's way. Arkwright was never able to enforce a monopoly. He had to face constant competition, and this city became dotted with different mills, all of them owned by different people, all of them competing, trying to come up with new products, with better cloth-making techniques. And so it was a city of competition, and that competition helped to make Manchester one of the most innovative and productive places on the planet, the city at the heart of the Industrial Revolution.
We lost it right at the end there, but I think we have a good solid ending on a couple of our takes, so I'm not so worried.
Okay.
I think we're good. We've got
Huge chunk of sun coming here.
Okay, let's go and do waterways though. Can you pull up waterways?